Hi there, Michelle Dewberry, Steve McCabe and Alex Dean till 7 o'clock. Look, NHS is in a pickle. We all know this. We've got delays popping up all over the place. We'll get this. An NHS trust in North London. This has kind of come under a little bit of scrutiny because, long story short, when people are delayed, it turns out that the patients that have interpreters, they are being prioritised to be seen as quick as possible because the NHS is pushing back, saying it doesn't want to incur extra costs from these interpreters. So they would be prioritised over English-speaking patients to be seen quickly. Alex?
When I was a barrister, I would see that people that one was prosecuting or defending who had interpreters might sometimes be called on for a case before one's own, or I might be called on sooner because I had a client with an interpreter, because the interpreter was needed somewhere else as well, and you were going to have a knock-on effect delaying trials. So this isn't unique to the healthcare system. However, in the example I give, people were being prioritised in order to ensure a more efficient use of the system, not about saving cash. In my view, in this example, people should be seen prioritised in the order of medical need and nothing else. And so for me, whilst I understand what they're seeking to do in preserving public funds, I think this is wrong.
Steve?
Well, I was pretty stunned when I saw the story, to be perfectly honest. It's pretty hard to accept. Look, I absolutely agree that people should be seen in terms of their health needs. That should be the priority. I think what the story does raise is an issue about the interpreters, how they're contracted, what they cost. If it is genuinely the case that this trust is having so much difficulty in terms of recruitment of interpreters and paying for them that it's impacting on healthcare, then it's time somebody took a long, hard look at that.
Isn't it going to be the case that some interpreters are used by the hour because it's a relatively, no offence to whatever community it is, obscure language in the British scheme of things, and they're only going to be used for an hour or two, and so you want to get them in and get that done rather than delaying it?
But if it was a one-off situation like that, or very occasional situation, surely it wouldn't lead to a story like this.
It wouldn't cost this much, yeah.
It's all very, very odd because this will often be happening when you've got, when you've got those tickets, you take a ticket and then you're supposed to go in order of the number. It's also happening when those schemes are present as well. I have got to say that actually the NHS Trust involved, we've obviously got a statement from them, and they say as follows. It's the Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust. They say, we're committed to responding to the specific needs raised by any of our patients, and every patient has the right to a professional interpreter. Given my accent, some might say that I could do with a professional interpreter. That has been said to me. Yeah, and you, actually. Sorry, you was going to come in, Alan.
You may well have the right to an interpreter. The question that's not asked properly in our system is, do you have the right to be treated? Because the National Health Service is not an international health service. And whilst, of course, there will be many people in this country in this day and age who can't speak English well enough to interact with the authorities, a separate question and a separate challenge, there are visitors to our country who use our healthcare system and are then not their countries are not charged for it under the systems we have set up. They absolutely ought to be. It's not actually a language point, it's a nationality point.
Is that fair?
Well, if you've got to the stage where you're in the queue waiting to be seen, one assumes that whatever sort of process is in place has taken place. I don't think we should be expecting the doctors to be immigration officers.
And I'm afraid it doesn't. People are not...
are you seriously saying that as well as treating people and dealing with all the other things, doctors and nurses should be required to get people to fill in a form to decide their eligibility? Surely to goodness that should be done before they get to the stage of waiting in a queue.
I am saying that the hospital
I think that's ridiculous.
Forgive me, I am saying the hospital should do it, and pretending you think the surgeon should do it before he operates
is avoiding...
No, that's the point.
Well, they don't do it very effectively. When you actually look at the bills incurred versus the bills that are actually paid, and of course many people will point to services like maternity services, because there seems to be quite a lot of people that will come to this country when they are literally just about to pop, if you excuse me being so crude. They'll have their babies on the NHS and then off they go again.
Yeah, well, every measure to stop health tourism should be taken. Actually, an awful lot of people who come to this country have to take out health insurance before they're allowed to step into this country, and that also happens. I'm not saying people don't evade it, but there's quite a rigorous system for requiring people to take out health insurance.
Some people are saying that the NHS shouldn't even provide Interpreters. Goodness me, what do you think to that? It's quite a tough one, isn't it? It's very rare I'm on the fence, I can tell you now, but I can kind of see both sides when it comes to interpreters. But this whole notion that you should be leapfrogged, get priority in the queue, really? I don't really support that, I've got to say. And I definitely think we need to be doing much, much more to get people that shouldn't be using the NHS to actually pay for the service that they receive. One of the things that's overshadowed this conference massively is the rows about the donors and what they've been getting.
So I want to... You were inviting us to discuss whether the Chancellor's approach is broadly working in early days. And yet, to be fair, of course, there are things that she's doing that I agree with. I think she's right not to just splurge on everything. I think she's right about winter fuel allowance, although my support is precisely that which she doesn't want. But she's really trying to push the stone uphill, I'm afraid, because nobody's listening at the moment. The Labour Party, under this leadership, was so... it held itself out as offering such a moral stance and criticised the Conservative Party for alleged corruption in everywhere you looked. And now, the donation scandal hitting Labour over the most kind of venal stuff, the tawdry stuff, like, you know, events and tickets for stuff and spectacles and clothes and so forth, through to the £4 million donation they landed before the election from a Cayman Islands fund, which, of course, has only just been declared because of the delay in the Electoral Commission. So right from the most tawdry, venal, self-serving stuff through to the largest kind of money in public life debate, it just looks like not only is the Labour Party at it, they're far better at it than any in the Tory Party ever was.
Steve?
Well, I don't think the whole issue of the donations and the help with clothing and things like that has done them any favours. I think everybody would acknowledge that. But to pretend it's remotely on a scale that could be compared to what was happening over the last period of the Tory government is utterly absurd.
Why is it?
Because we're talking about small amounts of money compared to people who were being given millions in deals to exploit things like COVID.
So, Steve, your constituents in the two Birmingham seats you represented, you said to them, you know, the Prime Minister had 100 grand of gifts from donors, which is the case, he acknowledges. You think that would be a small amount to them?
I said in comparison... And we are talking about relatively small sums in comparison to the amount of money that was the focus of the Tory sleaze issues.
That's the instinct to immediately say Tories and sleaze. That's the problem. This debate wouldn't matter so much if it weren't the default setting of Labour having been in opposition to say that, to pretend some kind of moral superiority and say that the Tories were at this all the time. I am absolutely up for the pursuit of any kind of wrong deal that happened under the COVID contract. And that's one of the things I think that thanks very much. But I wasn't saying it, of course, for your approval. I was saying it because I think the Chancellor is right to pursue contracts that have been given to businesses in the wrong way. That still doesn't excuse personal venality from the leadership of the Labour Party, who pretended to have some kind of moral superiority. It's the hypocrisy that damns them, Steve. That's what gets them.
Is that fair?
Well, I don't think it is fair, because I think the reality is this is known because Labour declared that they complied with the rules. They were upfront about it. They didn't try to disguise it and pretend they didn't know who the donors were and say that they didn't have the money and, oh, yes, they did after all. None of that. Labour was upfront. It's been picked up, understandably, by the opposition, and they're trying to exploit it to the best of their ability. Who can blame them for doing that? It takes the pressure off them at the moment.
It's not the opposition, it's the public and it's the media. Because who could not be interested in something? It's such a personal thing. You know, someone paid you to give your wife some clothing. Why does somebody give your wife money for clothes unless they wanted something? Why would someone do that? Why would someone give your wife clothes? Steve?
Well, I think the point is not that they were giving your wife clothes. They were giving money to the leader of the opposition's wife and to the Prime Minister's wife for clothing she was going to wear at public events. It is rather different. You know that, and I know that.
And why would they want to give that sort of thing? What's the quid pro quo?
Donors, just like donors for every other political party, donate because they support the party and they want it to do well. That's not unusual. It's not unusual in British political history, to the best of my knowledge. Whilst
I think you're struggling a bit, you're doing a far better job than the Prime Minister did, because the Prime Minister's position is to say, I obeyed the rules, which which is one of the things you said. And this is the trouble. You're a much better politician than the Prime Minister, who is pretty...
I feel get you everywhere.
Yeah, but he may have been a perfectly good lawyer, but it's a very lawyerly answer. I've obeyed all of the rules, and that's the end of the matter, is what he said. Well, no, actually, for most people, it's the beginning of the matter. You may well have obeyed the letter of the law, but this stinks to me, is what a lot of people will have said. When you're getting 100 grand of money for tickets to events that other people don't get, and being given money for your suits and so on.
Well, I mean, we will end up at the stage where no politician will go to any event. And if that's what people want...
I know this will sound very strange. You can pay for your own tickets. I know that's a very weird idea, but for well-paid people, which we all are,
didn't discover,
pay for yourself.
We didn't discover a couple of months ago that politicians went to events on free tickets. It's been happening for as long as I or you can remember. And if you want to get to a stage where there are to be no free tickets, I wonder how long before that will extend beyond politicians to a whole host of other people.
And like I say, it wouldn't matter so much if the Labour Party hadn't held itself out to have had a monopoly on virtue. And it turns out not only do they not have a monopoly on virtue, I'm not sure they've got any.
So many people at home will be sitting here thinking and shouting out that this whole thing is just weird. Because this whole notion that someone that's highly paid, 90-odd grand and upwards, when we start looking at prime ministers, needs somebody to buy their own clothes is just weird to most normal people. People will be shouting out, well, hang on, wallpaper, why are people buying wallpaper for the likes of Boris Johnson when he was renovating wherever he was, number 10? And your notion that we're going to end up in a situation where politicians don't go to events, people at home do not care less whether or not politicians are at Taylor Swift. It's not benefiting them. They're not there because they are somehow helping their constituents by watching Taylor Swift.
No, I agree. People at home don't care at all. I'm simply making the point that if we carry this through to its logical conclusion, then you will not get politicians attending events. There are events that actually try to encourage politicians and celebrities and all sorts of other people to come along. They will stop going.
Before we lose the thread too much, I just want to... I'll be the last Japanese soldier on my jungle island defending the late Prime Minister on the wallpaper thing. So just that was... 10 Downing Street is an absolute hole, as you will know better than me, having spent more time there. But it's a dump. And, you know, if you've got a stately home or if you had a national asset that was in that kind of state, you would want it to be
I don't dispute that.
And so, but the point was, you could either get the state to pay for it because it's a just stately home type listed building, or you could secure, or yes, you could pay for it yourself, or you could secure a donor to improve something that is a public asset. It's not the same as a Taylor Swift ticket, is it? Or going to the Arsenal.
I just think
sounds like one rule for some and a different rule for others to me.
There's just this huge disconnection among what I would almost call like the political elite and every other man and person at home, because every other man and person at home, they would just pay for their own wallpaper. If they wanted to change the wallpaper, if they wanted to get a dress, if they wanted to go somewhere, whatever, they'd pay for it themselves. And people shout.
The ambiguity is that if you're the Prime Minister, number 10 Downing Street is both your home and a government office, right? So who might pay for that? You can discuss it. Keir Starmer doesn't live at the Arsenal and he doesn't live with Taylor Swift, unless there's another story going to break that's going to surprise us all, right? So actually, you know, the kind of things he's been getting handouts for, getting his specs paid for and so forth, the suggestion that's comparable with improving or restoring Downing Street is ridiculous.
Well, of course, the question of whether or not Downing Street was improved is a matter of taste. I have quite a few contrary views.
But the challenge is, look, winter fuel, many people watching this, they will have had their winter fuel allowance cut £200-300 quid, depending on where you are, will be lost to you this year. So this is the issue. People are going, hang on, so I have to lose £200-300 quid, and then all of this other stuff is going on. The unions today, they wanted to have a vote about this winter fuel allowance. They wanted it to happen today. It was pushed back to Wednesday. They're not happy about that. So what do you think, Alex?
Well, I mean, there is at least one pensioner doing better under this government. Sue Gray's got a nice big pay package. I can't help but notice. But more generally, actually think I'm quite supportive of the government, which is precisely what they don't want to hear. But the idea we should have been giving more than 11 million people a handout every single year, many of whom were wealthier than the average worker in this country. Like, many people on pensions are wealthier than the average person working in the UK. The idea that you should just splurge to all of them because there are some people that the state should already have had the wherewithal to identify who are in need, for me that was ridiculous. So taking that bill down from 11 million to 1.5, which is what the government's doing, seems to me to be right. Have you got the right 1.5? Should it be slightly higher than 1.5? Sure, but the direction of travel is correct. The trouble for Labour is they promised not to do this in 10, 15, 17 and 19 at general elections. So, you know, most people in the Labour Party will have had a firm sense that they would never do this in government. Instead, it's one of the first things they do out the gate.
Steve?
Well, we agree that it's probably the right thing to do. I don't think there's much argument between Alex and I there. I've said before, I think this is the wrong target. I think people should be looking at the standing charge of the energy supply companies, and I hope that might still feature. As regards when the vote takes place, I mean, you know, to be perfectly honest, either you really care about it so passionately that you want a debate and a vote, or you're looking for headlines and you're looking for gimmicks, and therefore you're worried about when it happens and how it happens. Yeah. I think if you're that bothered about it, you'll be glad that it's on the agenda and that you're going to get a vote.
They may yet U-turn, you know. I know that the more political capital you spend on this stuff, the more you feel like you can't. But ultimately, in politics, people will sometimes say this is good money after bad. We've got to stop the bleeding. They're losing so much support in their own. I don't just mean the fringe protesters that you saw at their conference. That happens at political parties, and that's not going to change the weather. But up and down the country, millions of people have been really switched off from the Labour Party because of this decision. No matter how much Steve or I think it's right or wrong, they still might U-turn.
Yeah, I mean, I speak to viewers every single day, and there is a huge sense of fury. That's how I would put it. I'm not exaggerating. People are furious about this. And even people, actually, that are relatively well off, their perspective will be, hang on a second, I worked all of my life. I was a huge contributor to the tax system. So what if I get 200 or 300 quid? I don't get anything else? Leave me alone. You
do. You get a pension, and your argument might be for a fairer, more equitable, more significant pension. But the idea we just splurge to everybody for winter fuel for many millions of people who don't need it, I think it's daft.
Is it?
Well, I think it's always difficult when you take away any kind of benefit from people, you know, and governments of all complexions have experienced that problem. I'm not sure the winter fuel allowance was ever intended to be a universal benefit. So I do think there is a very valid argument. And funnily enough, if we'd been having this conversation several months ago, I would have been able to tell you about the pensioners I'd met who said, I don't need it, I never use it to pay for fuel. It's just an extra. Because those people existed, but they appear to have disappeared now.
Could they have opted out?
Yes, and actually, it's never had 100% take-up. People have opted out, but not in large numbers.
Yeah. And if you get money that you don't want and it is inadvertently finding its way into your bank account, you can, of course, always cut a cheque to HMRC. You know what they'll do? They'll cash it.
I'm always just fascinated, though, by the optics of this. I think you've come into government and you reckon there's a £22 billion hole. Why would your first priority be domestic pensioners when you're spending so much money? People talk about 100 million quid or whatever it was, helping fight climate change. Was it 100 million quid? Is that the figure that I hear bandied around? To overseas governments to help climate change, to stop upstream issues when it comes to migration. People will say, well, why can we still afford to do things like that? Why can we still afford to fund Ukraine? Why can we afford to do all the other things? Why is it British pensioners that have come straight in the line of fire, straight from the off? You'll have very strong opinions about all of this at home. There's lots I want to talk to you about